In my motion sequences video, I showed you how you can attach a motion sequence either to the super knob or to individual part parameters. But there's a handful of other things I need to talk about just to make sure that you've got the hang of this. One of those is that I talked about the fact that you can switch between 8 motion sequences, but it's important to note that even if you haven't edited those sequences, they always exist. So as you'll recall, we set up a saw wave, a square wave, a sine wave, a sequence, and then we didn't touch sequences 6, 7 and 8. But they are there and they are present. If you want to have a motion sequence effectively not exist, the best way to do that is to go and edit the sequence and set its amplitude to 0 so that it will make no difference. You can see that the super knob isn't moving anymore. So now if we come back out of there, switch to motion sequence 1, you can see it working. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is my effectively dead motion sequence where nothing happens. What I like to do personally is to not use the amplitude, but to actually go and change the sliders to all be set to minimum so that when you go to the editor, you can see at a glance that it's not active. In sequence 5, I had a stepped pitch shift. And I showed you that you can turn that on to trigger and turn off loop. And have it play that sequence. But this is no longer middle C, because when the performance stops, the parameters of the part that was affected by it will retain the settings of the last step of the sequence. So let's turn off the motion sequence completely and hear that again. How can you work around that? Well, it's quite simple really. If you want to use a stepped sequence like this and you need to return to the original value, just make sure that your final value has no effect. Let's hear that now. The other thing to note is that while this is adjusting the pitch, it is not re-triggering the note. So you won't hear the attack and decay portion of the amplitude or filter envelope as the notes shift. To show you what I mean by that, let's go and add a bit of envelope to this. Let's increase the attack slightly. And do the same with the filter. And now let's hear the motion sequence with it. So as you can hear, that is effectively just one key being triggered and then its pitch is being shifted rather than individual tones being reinitialized with each pitch shift. The final thing to note relates to triggering and looping, because it's not possible to trigger one sequence within a lane but not the others. So the trigger and the loop switch are at the lane level. So if I set lane 1 to trigger, then all of the sequences within lane 1 will trigger. I can't define different behaviors for the different sequences within that. And the same goes for looping.